I get Savannah needs.
We invite all other characters to join us in standing for a recitation of the Lord's Prayer, followed by a moment of silence. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. It is now 7 o'clock. Shelby City Council meeting is called to order. I have a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please, Mr. Crowe.
Mr. Robb. Here. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Gates. Here. Mr. Martin.
Here.
Mr. McLaughlin.
I'll now entertain a motion to excuse Mr. Roberts. For the record, he called and he is ill this evening and not able to be present.
Move to excuse Mr. Roberts.
Second. We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin for the excusing of Mr. Roberts. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Robb.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin.
That motion passes. Thank you. I'll now entertain a motion to dispense with the reading of the journal from August 15th, 2022.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Robb and a second by Mr. Martin to dispense with the reading of the journal from August 15, 2022. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Robb.
Yay.
That motion to dispense with the reading passes. Now come to the time for public comment. If anyone has public comment they would like to make before council this evening, you step to the podium, state your name and address, and make your comment. Or if someone has received an email public comment they would like to share. Hearing or seeing no public comment, we'll move forward then to reports from standing and special committees. The Community and Economic Development Committee met this afternoon with Councilman McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We did meet briefly, and there are just 4 items I'd like to touch on at this point. The Shelby Historical Preservation Committee had this, that they wanted to report. The Ohio Historical Connections Building Doctor Clinic is coming to Shelby October 10 and 11. The October 10 seminar will be conducted at 7 p.m. at the Shelby High School, and the public is invited. The professional preservationists will tour up to 10 buildings October 11th to look at issues and offer suggestions for repairs. Buildings do not have to be on historic landmarks listing. Next, the commission on behalf of the city was awarded the Certified Local Government Grant to complete local design guidelines. We're awaiting approval of the RFP verbiage from the State Historical Preservation Office and then can put the project out for bid. The project includes 2 public forums and monthly meetings with the consultant to formulation design guidelines. The grant will be completed by December 2023. Then from the CIC, noon this Thursday is a groundbreaking for the Black Fork Common Park. And then finally, Jessica Gribben, our Economic Development Liaison, said the regional planning housing study is more than halfway through at this point, and Dr. Webb will be in town sometime this month to give updates. That is all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. McLaughlin in regard to his report? All right, hearing none, we'll move forward then to Public Works and General Operations Committee. Councilman Robb.
The committee met on the 23rd and discussed the following. There was a damaged fiber line that took out the phone system for the city on the evening of the 22nd, and there's a redundant system built in there, and within a few hours, they were able to get a switch back over for the Justice Center the same night, and the fiber was repaired on the 23rd, and the phones were restored. Mr. Geis said the ordinance concerning the charter amendment was sent to the Board of Elections to be placed on the ballot in November. Under well, there were some regarding property issues, ongoing issues. 11 letters were sent to persons concerning a variety of issues, and Mr. Dean was invited to attend the parking meeting because there were some concerns over junk vehicles and vehicle parking in yards and so on and so forth. So that invitation was made to him to attend that meeting, and we look forward to seeing him there. Mr. Geis attended a floodplain conference on the 24th and 25th, and he'll probably have more on that. And last but not least, the groundbreaking for the Black Fork Commons will be September 8th at noon. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilman Rob. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Rob in regard to his report? The only comment I would make is that Mr. Dean, as a code enforcement officer, has really been doing a really good job. He's got a firm grasp on that position, and he and Mr. Geis and Ms. Conrad are working well together, and I think they're making some real some good efforts and progress in exterior maintenance and grass and all the rest that we brought him on for. So he's doing a good job. The parking committee, I think, as I remember talking with Councilman Roberts, that they were still lining up some more ordinances and wording and language and so forth. So that's going to be in the near future that they will meet and have good reason to meet. So we'll move on to reports of city officials. My report will be very brief. Since our last meeting, I've been occupied with typical mayoral activities, albeit in a somewhat curtailed fashion and still in recovery, but been coming to the office and taking care of issues there. I did hold a monthly mayor staff meeting on the 18th. And on the 22nd, I had the privilege of swearing in Tanner Hamilton as our newest member of the volunteer firefighter team. And as been mentioned already, the Black Fork Commons Plaza project groundbreaking will be Thursday. And one of the organizers stated that we may have somewhere around 100 in attendance. So it's certainly one of our larger groundbreaking ceremonies. So I hope you all can attend and be a part of this very marvelous and memorable occasion in Shelby. And that's my report. Are there any comments or questions for me? All right, if not, we'll move forward then to Mr. Crum. I believe the next. So by memory.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, a fairly brief report for me. I was actually on vacation last week, so bear with me, guys, tonight. I'm still, I think, 117 emails behind. So I'm working through that. I do want to thank the whole staff at City Hall for helping out while I was gone, and special thanks to Lisa Jordan for doing the tank department solo here for the time being. We do have several good applicants, and we hope to have that other position filled very soon here. We'll probably find the personnel and council meeting next week. That really is all I have, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Crum. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Crum? All right, now move forward to Mr. Eister.
Thank you, Mayor. No report tonight.
Mr. Eister. Mr. Geis, project coordinator.
Thank you, Mayor. All of our streets have been paved. It will start, we're supposed to start today. I'm assuming the rain held them off to adjust all the manholes, catch basins, and the water valves. On our downtown streetscape, they finished up on the north side today, pouring the last concrete to that approach. They started already cutting out on the south side, so they will start digging that out tomorrow. they've already made their cuts and so forth. And as part of that, there will, on October 3rd, there'll be a 30-day closure of Main Street from the east side of High School Avenue to the west side of Washington Street. So that is so they can totally redo the intersection of High School Avenue and the main crosswalk across Main Street there down by the old City Hall for that property. We talked about the Black Fork groundbreaking. As part of the streetscape, that the west entrance to Black Fork Commons will be closed so they can work on that intersection there. It'll be the east side, so we'll probably have to walk on the east entrance to Black Fork Commons to get in there, so just a heads up. I'll let the CIC members know all that also. And as stated, I did attend the Iowa Floodplain Conference. That gets me my CEUs for my CFM for the year, so that's always nice. But it's always good to get refreshed on all those items and learn a few things and talk to, I think you get more from the networking sometimes when you do the conferencing, but that's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gate. Guys, any comments or questions from Mr. Geis in regard to his report? All right, now we'll move forward then to new business. Any new business to be brought before council this evening? Hearing none, under unfinished business, the former ice plant property. There have been some discussions, but nothing to report publicly at this point on the ice plant property. Any other unfinished business? If not, we'll move forward then to legislation. Mr. Cobb.
Ordinance number 17, 2022, amending section 642.15, placing signs of chapter 642, offenses relating to property of the codified ordinances of the city of Shelby, Ohio.
Move for second reading.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. McLaughlin for the second reading of ordinance number 17, 2022. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin? Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Ordinance number 17, 2022 passes its second reading.
Ordinance number 18, 2022, approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the codified ordinances, approving, adopting, and enacting new matter in the updated and revised codified ordinances, repealing ordinances in conflict therewith, and declaring an emergency.
Mayor, I move that the rule requiring that an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin that the rule requiring an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin? Mr. Rob?
Yay.
The motion to suspend passes.
Move the ordinance be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin for the passage of ordinance number 18, 2022. Discussion. Mr. Gates.
Mayor, this is an annual piece of legislation we see. It's what I refer to as a housekeeping piece of legislation. We can see here the number of ordinances that we passed in the previous year that are of a permanent nature. And what this does, of course, is to allow American Legal Publishing to go through and make new pages that can be put into the hard copies of this. All of the changes are from ordinances that have come from this council, and so what's contained in those should be no surprise at all to any department head. Unlike changes that sometimes come through that are a result of state law changes. So these are all local changes that would be put into our ordinance book.
Very good. Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Ordinance number 18, 2022 passes.
Ordinance number 19, 2022, amending ordinance number 3, 2022, annual appropriations and declaring an emergency.
I move that the rule requiring that an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin that the rule requiring that ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
The motion to suspend passes.
Move the ordinance be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Robb for the passage of ordinance number 19, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, would the finance director give us a brief explanation of these supplemental appropriations?
I would be happy to. So a lot of these are just line items getting a little close as it starts to happen this time of year. And unfortunately, this year, with expenses just seem to keep going up and up, there was definitely, didn't expect quite this much inflation at appropriations time. So I hope to keep these down as low as possible, and we might have to start switching to doing some transfers as because I don't want to spend more than I think we'll bring in. There are a few to note. The first line is maintenance, building and grounds for the city buildings. I'd like to add $20,000 to that line item. The biggest change is we've had some HVAC issues. Mr. Geis can probably explain that more at the time unless you like some information now, but just unexpected, and so that hurt that line a little bit. The 101 miscellaneous, the tree cutting from the storm damage, those were expensed out of that line, and so that really bumped up the expenditures there. The only other big one is the service vehicle for $50,000 in the 300 fund. As I've jokingly been saying, Mr. Thompson keeps breaking his toys. But our ladder truck has some issues. As we have a resolution, later on tonight. We need to fund that line in order to consider that resolution. I do believe that there will be enough funds in the 300 fund just from the transfers from the income tax to cover that additional expenditure, so I don't think we need to transfer any more funds over at this point to cover those expenses. So that's my largest begging and pleading council's approval, but the rest is just a little housekeeping because we're just cutting it a little close.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Ordinance number 19, 2022 passes. I might request a 5-minute recess.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin for a 5-minute recess. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
We recess at 7:17. Thank you, gentlemen.
A la C-SPAN, we should have some music
I
playing.
Enter grueling music.
Something from Bach or Vivaldi or something.
I always enjoy the closed captioning description.
You started giving them a hard
And 3 weeks.
The last other tree,
Yeah, hey, Joe, you might as well start putting all this stuff away.
needs to be better.
What is it again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that saying? What's it? Order them back.
What did you start saying?
One person watching. Might pass the paperwork around and get me thrown out of office. Might start singing.
The recall.
The recall might be in effect.
I said, my wife got a really pretty good video.
What are they gonna do,
I didn't see it following.
I like the state. I think when he first came home, he did not like the field.
Really?
Didn't like it. But I think that's because it wasn't settled and that stuff wasn't going down in. It felt just,
He's
I
calling.
know.
I would say swampy to him, but because after the game, yeah, there's small things getting better. I walked down on it.
I mean, that's super good.
Shoot full of rubber.
And I heard him talking back and forth after. and
That's gonna be amazing when it gets completed.
Oh, man.
Mansfield Tower, Cleveland Tower were pretty excited. You know what I mean? It was just
He's got the baseball complex and
Yeah, they were-
everything other.
They were giving him a lot of, there was a lot of back and forth. It was pretty cool. A couple times I got concerned because Randy was calling him and no answer. He was calling Randy and no answer. And he said I had to come closer because I was too far up in there. That was cool.
Yeah.
That was really. That was teary. I said,
Well, the police council, we can come back in the session at 7:20. Are you ready, Mr. Trump?
Sure.
Council is back in session at 7:20.
Ordinance number 20, 2022, amending section 618.12, hunting prohibited of chapter 618 animals of the codified ordinances of the city of Shelby.
Move for first reading.
Second. We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin for the first reading of ordinance number 20, 2022. Discussion. Mr. Gates.
Mayor, I had given people advance notice last meeting that I would be bringing forth this piece of legislation. This is all too often, and it's the nature of how things work, legislatures and legislation is reactive. Here's a case, I think, where we are being proactive. In communication from the police chief, I learned about the possibility, or not the possibility, the reporting of coyotes within the city limits. And the existing hunting ordinance actually prohibits hunting within the city limits, but allows the police chief to authorize the hunting of rats and other rodents, which of course doesn't include coyotes. So that's what this ordinance would do. It doesn't specifically mention coyotes in the ordinance, but up in the whereas, second whereas, it says that the ODNR has designated the coyote as a, quote, nuisance species, unquote. And so down in the proposed ordinance, it would refers to the killing of rats and other nuisance animals, and then with an important parenthetical, as determined by the Ohio Division of Wildlife. If my neighbor's cat comes over and defecates in my tomato plants, among my tomato plants, I certainly consider that cat to be a nuisance. But that cat has not been determined to be a nuisance by the Division of Wildlife. So that's the important thing. And I had two people, one constituent near and dear to my heart, and another person across town called and was concerned specifically, what about the neighbor's cat? So that's where the parenthetical came from. And again, hunting is prohibited now and would still continue to be prohibited unless a person is specifically authorized by the chief of police. And knowing as thorough as Chief Combs is, he's going to, the authorization he gives is going to be, I know this, is going to be very specific to a person on specific dates with a particular type of firearm, with a specific type of animal. So, the general residents can't take it upon themselves to make a determination and then go hunting. It's only through a specific authorization by the police chief, which is the current situation now. The other ordinance, the current ordinance says the hunting of animals and fowl. Well, last I looked, fowl were animals, so I took those two references out. But again, this is an opportunity for us to be proactive. I hope we don't have to be, but we know that coyotes are spreading everywhere. They are very smart animals. They're very adaptable animals. And they like small dogs and cats for food. So I'm happy to have this on the board, prior to someone calling and saying, Spot or Puff got eaten.
Thank you for that information. Mr. Martin.
I have no problem with the ordinance or the changes. Just the wording seems a little clunky to me. And really, so I understand the intent is the use of firearms in general, but it does say, or any other means. So I guess my question is, like, kill a mouse in your house, how is that not prohibited by this paragraph? So my reading of this is that I would have to actually get a authorization from the chief of police to kill a mouse in my house.
Mr. Rob.
Well, I think to answer that, common sense would tell us that we don't hunt mice, we exterminate them. I mean, there's a big difference between setting a mouse trap and shooting a rifle.
I understand that, but the paragraph 4 says no person shall hunt, comma, kill, comma, or attempt to kill any animal by use of firearms or any other means. It's not just limited to quote-unquote hunting. Even if I agree with you, common sense dictates you should be able to kill a mouse in your house. The problem is, are we making something illegal that is foolish for us to make illegal? And I understand we're using language that was already in existence, but since we're here, and we have this legislation, let's clean it up to make it a little more clear to that. I think it's just some clunky wording, but to me it's prohibited. It's literally the killing of any animal unless there is explicit authorization from the chief of police.
Mr. Gates.
Well, with all due respect, I find this point to be silly. Let's look at the first line. The hunting of animals within the municipality is prohibited. We know what hunting means. You've got a firearm, you've got a bow and arrow. And trapping probably comes into that because you have to get a hunting license to go trapping. Now, if the member wants to bring in language to amend at second reading, that's fine. I wish he had read this before this evening and could have brought that in, but he didn't. So again, I think it's just silly to say that to bring in killing of mice in your house at this point.
Mr. Martin.
Well, this member was asking a question and making sure that I was reading this correctly. So I would like some clarity on that. It's a first reading. Silliness aside, I'm not the one that outlawed killing a mouse in someone's house in the legislation.
Mr. Gates.
I don't believe the current ordinance does that.
Any further discussion? Mr. Martin.
I can speak to it very briefly.
Chief.
So we also have an ordinance that prohibits the discharging of a firearm inside the city limits. This particular ordinance in 99.9% of the cases is specifically trapping and specific types of traps. In 5 to 7 years, I've issued 2 letters both for groundhogs, because groundhogs are a marmot, they're considered a rodent. The ordinance specifies the means. Normally, this would be done, again, by trapping, and coyotes can also be caught by traps. However, in some instances, in very specific instances, in very specific places, and in very specific time frames with very specific firearms, coyotes are not considered, there is no beginning and end season on coyotes, so it's technically not hunting. It is extermination of a specific type of nuisance animal. So that is the specific difference. People could still go out. As far as I know, there's no prohibition on people live trapping. People do that all the time. Although ODNR doesn't want raccoons moved somewhere else, you can live trap them, but they don't provide for the release of those animals in other parts. So live trapping is still okay. People live trap cats as well and relocate them. So while this doesn't really clarify your very specific question, there is a prohibition on firearms within the city limits, but there is an allowance within that ordinance for rodents. And I have allowed in one instance for a firearm to be used on a group of groundhogs, only because there was no other safe way of doing it within that specific time frame and a concern about other animals being caught in traps. So that's what the intent is. And I think this is primarily this is under under health, safety, and sanitation, I believe. So rodents, in that view, would only be infestation of rodents or other animals outside of one's home. That's the way I always interpreted that. If there's a clarification to be made, then council is certainly available to do that. But this is a very specific set of circumstances that, again, has occurred twice during my tenure with a letter. So.
Any further discussion? This is the first reading. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rock?
Yay.
Ordinance number 2022 passes first reading.
Resolution number 48, 2022, authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Safety to enter into an agreement with Johnson's Emergency Vehicle Solutions to make repairs to Shelby Fire Ladder 37 and declaring an emergency.
Move the resolution be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. McLaughlin for the passage of Resolution 48, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, the fire chief is here. He's the person who can best comment on this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, our letter 37 is a 1999 vehicle, so it's 23 years old. There's going to be some maintenance with it. With being a ladder, it's independently tested by an outside agency every year and must pass. The truck has been here longer than I have with Shelby Fire. It's a company we've always used. I don't think they did a real thorough job after getting another company for a second opinion and seeing their report. Johnson's was actually up here with this company, so while the testing was going on, they could troubleshoot, start lining parts up, and get everything lined up they needed to fix it. The bid is on the high end. They try to make that worst case scenario. Of course, when you're tearing things apart, there might be some hidden surprises, but basically, it's cylinder repair. The ladder it's still fine as a fire truck, works just fine, no problems there. The ladder, when you put it up, is retracting on itself, pulling in. So the cylinders need rebuilt, and the cables need replaced. They said it's well worth putting the money into. Replacement cost of this vehicle is probably $750,000 to $1 million. So $750,000 for me. But definitely a valuable piece of equipment right now in Richland County. Mansfield has a ladder available if they're not using it, and Madison just put they rehabbed one of Mansfield's old one, which is actually a sister to this one, And those are the only ladders in Richland County. Our next closest is Ashland or Warren. With our size buildings, it's pretty fair that we get it fixed. The truck is, they said the truck is in great shape. It's just 23-year-old cylinders. They need some rehab.
Mr. Gates?
Mayor, what's the time frame on these repairs?
They've already started the process of getting some of the stuff together. I just have to give them the green light, and it depends on their scheduling. To save money, we're gonna drive to Jackson, Ohio. They offered to put people up that on our dime, stay at a hotel, but anytime they need an extra part, they're gonna drive back to Jackson. I said, how about let's drive to Jackson? So it'll be out of service while it's down there. They'd rather have it down there anyhow, because that's where all the parts are. So, we're gonna take her down, drop her off, and we'll go back and get it when she's done. So like I said, they said the truck was in amazing shape. They said for the age of it, they said you guys have taken very decent care of it. Unfortunately, with the ladder, like I said, our testing company, wasn't real happy with the thoroughness they did, and we're not certified to work on ladders anyhow. So, I think it's well worth it.
Mr. Martin?
To put the numbers kind of in perspective to what the layperson would understand, it'd be the equivalent of doing a $1,500 repair on a $30,000 vehicle. So, people look at, $40,000, well, it's
Yeah.
almost $1 million.
It's a very expensive truck,
So,
but it's been the tube work several times. We've used, it has a very specific purpose with our large structures downtown, MTD, COIP. Just look at the new school out here. That's a huge building. So it's a very important piece of equipment for us. And our guys, believe me, I get quizzed on it every day because they want their one service. So I'll be on. If this passes tomorrow morning, first order of business.
Thank you, Chief. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin? Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Resolution number 48, 2022 passes. Now come for miscellaneous business, and miscellaneous business to be brought before council. Mr. Gates.
Mayor, the council adjourned.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Martin for adjournment. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin? Mr. Rob?
Yay.
The motion passes. Council adjourns at 7:36. Thank you, gentlemen.